Tom Tugendhat. He calls for the Thatcher-style revolution. During his final conference speech, Tom Tugendhat said, "Real growth, not the illusion of growth, that has been boosted by migration, has barely shifted in the past 30 years, and that's left us poorer and more vulnerable. We need to free the economy. We need a new conservative revolution. That's what Margaret Thatcher did. That's what we need to do again, and we can do it." Tugendhat also blasted the Labour Party, seemingly calling them socialist. He attacks Labour and socialism as a whole. He said, we're building on the strong foundations of the past, and I'm standing because I believe in Britain. I have fought for Britain, and I've had enough of those who want to manage decline. That's what socialism delivers. It's not who I am, it's not who you are, and it's nothing more too fatal to a mission that losing faith in the future. Nothing is more fatal to success than setting our ambitions so low that we don't even try. And nothing is more fatal to a nation than giving up on our belief in it. That's why we must win. Not in 10 years, not in 15, but in 5. We can't afford Labour. The country can't afford socialism. We can't afford to wait. And I will not wait. It's time to seize the moment and turn this around. Labour are socialists. It's not the first time someone has said that. Kevin, I want to get your response here. Despite the fact that we are still living in neoliberalism, nothing has fundamentally changed from Thatcherism. Why is Tugendhat calling for a Thatcherite revolution?
Because it's the only thing they know. They've essentially become a kind of Thatcherite religious cult. And they have the same reaction that all religious cults do. When things don't work, do more of the same thing because it's what the dear leader wanted or the dear leader asked for or demanded or whatever. They know one thing, and it's just more neoliberalism. Even though we saw with Liz Truss neoliberalism taken to its nth degree and how disastrous that is immediately, because even the uber capitalists know what an absolute disgrace it is and how obviously destructive that those kind of policies are. And it's not him alone who's making this kind of, frankly, batshit argument. Kemi Badenoch claimed that all of the Tory governments essentially were continuations of the Labour government, which I would agree with if she meant that they were all continuations, furtherances of Margaret Thatcher's government. But she means the previous Labour government were left-wing and they continue to remain being left-wing, which is interesting considering she served 3 prime ministers who she thinks were left-wing, but who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party. It's almost as if she's talking shite and just making things up, because anything to avoid the obvious conclusion that actually our policies are enormously destructive and unpopular. No one likes us and we have no chance of winning. So let's just double down.
I like that he says we don't want to continue this managed decline. Is he admitting then that for 14 years we have had a managed decline?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he was. Yeah. I think that's what happens when you don't actually have a real analysis. You just say all sorts of shit and it trips you up. But I do want you to respond to his comment about immigration providing fake growth. I mean, growth is growth, you know, whether it comes from migration or not. He doesn't sound particularly economically literate. I mean, what does he mean by the illusion of growth? And also, how would his Thatcherite revolution bring growth? How is it any different to what Liz Truss talked about or Rachel Reeves by growing the economy seemingly without state investment? We know that with Liz Truss, there was a state investment-led growth program under Rachel Reeves, which is the Green Prosperity Plan. But as we know, that got watered down. So they're just pushing neoliberalism again.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, he's essentially trying to dog whistle racism to the Conservative base and indeed to other members of the Conservative parliamentary party so that he can become a leader. Right now, he has no realistic chance, but he's fighting the good fight, so to speak. And so he's dog whistling racism in a way that's within the confines of his like economic one nation conservative bullshit. He's trying to be the heir to Thatcher, right? So that's what he's trying to do. Now, but the actual crux of his argument, there is a kernel of truth to, but in nowhere near the way he means. When he says it brings fake growth, in essence, it kind of does, because you're not creating growth, you're bringing in other people's growth. Rather than those people being in, the places they're originally from, building up the economic base there and being productive and creative and wonderful there, they're coming to us. So essentially, we're continuing to extract resources from the global south, right? And of course, it's something of a kind of a bubble that waits to burst, because we know that the older cohort is getting larger and larger each generation. and therefore you have a smaller and smaller tax base funding a larger and larger non-economically productive anymore class within society.
I mean, would you
Pensioners,
say he's
retired
right
people.
then? Would you say he's right for the wrong reasons? He's kind of right when he
He's
says it's
kind
an
of right
illusion
for
of growth.
entirely the
Right.
wrong reasons because, like you
Yes.
say, he doesn't have any kind of materialist analysis of this. He means it in some weird racist, like, oh, brown people coming in, they're just going to import the third world. All this rubbish or all this racist shite. What I'm referring to is the fact that you can't just have an increasing amount of people coming in to create a larger and larger cohort each generation, because that's just exponential growth, which is unsustainable. Essentially, you have to balance out your own the birth rate. I know that sounds like a weird Nazi talking point, but essentially, in order to sort of curtail the problem, you have to actually create your own people in the place. And you have to get the economic system in place where you don't need a larger and larger and larger group of people funding this system. You actually tax properly so that you can have that relatively smaller tax base that then takes care of the system entirely, because you're actually taxing the people that have the money to be able to pay for the system. We're not a poor country. We create enormous amounts of wealth. At the same time that everyone's wealth has been massively decreasing, the number of billionaires in this country has quadrupled. That is where your wealth has gone. That's where the taxable wealth that could pay for things like getting rid of the rack problem in schools, building HS2, funding the green the green projects that we need for the future energy supply. All of these things could be taken care of in a way that the Tories would never ever allow for. So when I say he's right, I mean he's incidentally hit upon a point whilst being a racist prick that has some kernel of sort of truth to it in a way he could never possibly understand. You are muted at my end.
That's again me, muted again. That's the
There you
second
go.
time that's happened actually in a row. We're professionals here. There is a discussion to be had when it comes to levels of immigration and our economic system. Now, I find it quite ironic that conservatives who push the low regulation, global capitalists economic system then moan about high levels of migrants when that is what that comes with this system, isn't it? Now,
Yeah.
for us
Well,
leftists, we don't talk about capping migration because we don't think it's a problem. But in a way, it's like, why don't the conservatives or right-leaning people adopt left-wing economic policies, some of it? Because then actually, if you invested in your own country, if you invested in jobs, invested in nursing and doctors, you wouldn't have to rely on importing
absolutely,
labor. It's very funny. There's a disconnect there. And I feel like, to me, that means none of these people are actually serious about reducing immigration, because
no,
if you say to them, if you want to reduce immigration, but I don't think we should, but if you want to, you have to fundamentally change your economic system. We have to do away with neoliberalism. And they go, oh, well, don't really like that. I quite like this form of capitalism.
Well,
and they keep immigration as a salient issue in order to win elections on.
Well, exactly, yeah. If they wanted to tackle immigration, they could have done so at any point in the last 14 years. But instead, we've seen numbers massively increase. I remember as a younger man hearing about mass migration under Tony Blair, and the numbers that he was allowing into the country have been dwarfed by the Conservative governments of the last 14 years. So if they were serious about tackling immigration, they could have done so. In fact, they've been, frankly, in terms of numbers coming in, the most liberal of any government that's ever been in Britain, right? We've seen massive numbers of people coming in, which can be absolutely dealt with if you invest in the infrastructure, because we've already got housing shortages. And if you add more people to that, obviously that becomes a problem. Obviously, there's strain on the NHS, etc., which can be gotten around by taxing rich people and spending on the infrastructure, right? So there's that, right? Like you say, if you invest in your own country, it becomes less of an issue. And secondly, on a kind of global scale, about, like I say, taking wealth essentially in human capital from the global south, if they are indeed set on a kind of bigger, longer scale solution to the problem, stop economically destroying places and stop literally physically destroying places by bombing them, because people don't generally tend to want to get up and move 4,000 miles away on foot. They leave because the place they're in has been destroyed, either economically or physically with Western bombs, or in many cases, both. That's why they're leaving. If they're from that place, they'll stay in that place. Most people do. Roughly speaking, within 100 miles of where you're born is probably where you're going to die. And that's fine. People are the way they are. And so don't fund and adore and absolutely praise systems that you know are going to create the very people, migrants, that you don't want to be here. Whether they want that to be the case because they're racist or not, if you actually don't want those people to leave those places, stop fucking destroying those places.
Also, they should take climate seriously, because if they don't want millions of climate refugees, then they would tackle the climate emergency.
Yeah, we
which
know
they won't
this.
do. I
We
mean,
know,
was it Tugendhat
a third of
doesn't
humanity?
like climate emergency?
Oh, they're all idiots. I think I made a note here. Kemi Badenoch compared environmentalism to communism. She said it was rebranded communism. She's a fucking idiot. So they're all in that kind of way. Yeah, a third of humanity lives within 100 miles of the coast. Those people aren't just going to keep moving inland and inland onto smaller and smaller parcels of land. They're going to move to other places. The people of Polynesia don't disappear overnight. Their islands do. They remain, and they're going to go places. Some of the places will be here, and they don't like that. The Tories don't like that, apparently, and yet they are more than happy to, personally go and punch a polar bear to death to prove how against environmentalism they are. They want to lock up, just up oil protesters for doing nothing for 1,000,000 years to show how absolutely authoritarian they are, as well as, of course, destroying the ozone layer and taking private jets down the pub, frankly, if they could. It's ridiculous. And ultimately, they sort of don't care because, again, as kind of pointed out earlier, it's surface level. They have the most scant reading of the situation, to the point where they believe like Facebook boomer memes because they seem vaguely plausible, and they're based on nothing.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.